Hello and welcome to the review summary of Defunct. This is a game by Freshly Squeezed, a Swedish developer, and it's published by Sodesco. I think I've mentioned a couple of their games for a few of our Next Week in Gaming articles in the past. Overall, pretty decent publisher that mainly does stuff on mobile. But this is a game that, for everything that I can see about it, is actually pretty unique, and it's more of a grow home type experience. And by grow home type experience, I mean kind of short, but everything about it is just simple and fantastic. Like, I have very few bad things to say about Defunct. The only issues I have with it are the same issues I had with Grow Home, which are quite minimal and more of a disappointment about the longevity of the game as opposed to actual parts of the game itself. So I'll just go through some of the things I didn't like at first, which is basically it's quite short, only takes about an hour and a half to complete overall, and then you've got a little bit of replay value when it comes to collectibles, which unlock tricks which aren't important. They're just something to mess around with when you're doing jumps. They unlock paint jobs for your little robot, which again aren't important. I think there's like 8 overall. And by collecting all these orbs and by finishing each of the levels within a specific amount of time, this is where your replay value comes from, and they unlock pointless cosmetic things, which are cool for some people, maybe not necessarily that interesting for others. And you know, the leaderboard system, there's like a time leaderboard system where whoever completes each level the fastest gets put on those top bits of leaderboards. Now, I'm personally not a massive fan of leaderboard games. I'm just not interested in points and trying to beat people on leaderboards. I have plenty of bad experiences with leaderboards on stuff like Microsoft Live, where it's, you know, people hacking Halo and getting 99.9999 billion points or whatever. But in general, leaderboards seem like a very 90s thing to add longevity for your game, so I'm not a massive fan of that. So it's short, not much replay value, and a lot of big parts of the game are based on speed, just going very fast and zooming past loads of different things and just having a blast. And occasionally the pace is changed by your own failings. If you mess up a jump or don't quite aim yourself correctly, you'll often end up just face planting a wall, stopping, or whatever. And if you don't fall down into oblivion and respawn, you just end up sort of stuck in an area, and you sort of have to use the B button, which starts your little engine thing, and it goes really slowly. And so you go from absolutely hurtling down this massive narrow path with loads of boosting and just insane speeds, and it's really, really good, really fun, everything is great, and then you sort of hit something, and then that longevity and speed is sort of stopped, and everything in an instant just sort of stops, and then it's not really that fun anymore. But this is kind of down to, you need to learn the game's mechanics. You need to sort of get the way the levels are made out in your head when you come to playing them and playing them again. And basically, you sort of play through the main storyline, and by the time you finish the main storyline, you then figured out how to play the game, and you've become reasonably skilled enough to play the whole game through reasonably smoothly. But then, sort of, you know, when you're actually playing the game for the first time, you come across these stumbling blocks which make you slow again, and it gets a bit jarring. So it's all just down to longevity, speed, that sort of thing. Those are the negatives. As for the positive, the rest of the game is absolutely fantastic. Literally, this is probably one of the favourite games I've ever played in 2016. The levels are massive. They're all completely different. The environments go from desert roads, forests, deep dark underbellies, some less pleasant areas where things are all junk and broken, some slightly more interesting areas where you've got this massive scrapyard and these great big turning wheel things that you can drive around in, and these massive downhill segments. And then there's this level where it's just hills as far as the eye can see, as wide as the eye can see. There is a little sort of, if you go really, really, really far to the right, then you'll get sort of blown back into the middle. But the levels are huge. They all look different. They're all massive. They're all really, really, really quite enjoyable. And they're nicely split up. The way that the game does sort of the progression, it's mixed in nicely together. So you start off with a tutorial, which is sort of like a smallish, slightly downhill map, sort of slow bumbling sort of thing for new players, get them used to the main mechanics, which are quite weird, very unique, by the way. Mechanics are fantastic. It's not just sort of go and break. And then it goes on to slightly faster things, and then it introduces you to how these puzzles are going to work. But it introduces you to the way that puzzles work in one of the faster, more sort of narrow, straightforward levels, and then opens up to the bigger levels that are fast and straightforward, and then opens up to the massive levels which are absolutely enormous in scope, and you then start to slow down and have to think about the way you solve puzzles. And then it sort of goes and flips between these more big puzzle areas and these narrow but really long multiple pathway speed areas where you're just blasting down somewhere as fast as possible to get the best time. So the progression's really nice. The variation of the levels is fantastic. There's tons of way you can make it down through a level. Obviously there are some sections which, you know, there is one good way and that's it, but for the most part you can pretty much just look at something and go, oh hey, I'm going to go over here, or oh, I'll take that way this time. And it's just really well designed. Unfortunately, the way this progression works is you progress through the entire game, you finally realize you're getting good, except by the time you get good, the game is finished. And so you end up using a lot of the skill you've learned, either redoing all the levels that you've already done, or collecting the orbs which unlock paint skins, and just generally doing the stuff that they think is the replay value part of the game. So it's a bit of a shame. The game overall is absolutely fantastic, it's just quite short. And I said in the full written review, I would quite happily spend another 20 hours doing exactly what the game has designed already. It's only an hour and a half long, but that hour and a half is genuinely fantastic. And if they just added 10, 20 more hours of that, just more levels slightly different to that, all the same sort of stuff, I would happily play it, because it's just a wonderful, simplistic, but really sort of gets you into the experience. It's great. I love the fact that they've mixed up speed with puzzles. I like the fact that they haven't just made it sort of a plain, they haven't made it too Sonic-y basically, and the mechanics are different enough that it doesn't feel Sonic-y, but it just feels like no one has created a game like this before. Just the way that the gravity thing works, and that you can speed up downhill, slow uphill, and the way that it works when it comes to bouncing things. I love this game. It's really quite good. And the other thing is the soundtrack and the way the levels are designed really sets the mood. In the early paragraphs and some of the early gameplay paragraphs I've written in the full review, I've sort of likened this to the first half an hour of Wall-E, where there's not really much sound and there's no talking, there's no voice actors, there's no nothing. And yet you feel everything that's going on, and they've done that perfectly in Defunct. You play this robot that can't speak, but it gesticulates in wild ways, and the way the music is throughout the different levels. So like, in some of the early stages, it's sort of like a slightly interesting but worried noise. In the faster levels, you get the really, really fast soundtracks. In the puzzle areas, you get sort of like this quick, interesting soundtrack that really matches what you're doing at the time. And then when you get into like the slightly more dark, grim ones, you get these slow, slightly worrying tones from the music. So the soundtrack that's been developed for this game is just utterly, utterly perfect. Now, it's quite a simple game, but it's really, really good, and as such the review is relatively short and simple. I will say that, you know, if you're not a leaderboard orientated person, the game's not that expensive. Yes, there's only an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of gameplay, but it's awesome. I know some people may not necessarily want to drop $10 on a game that's only an hour and a half, but it really is fantastic, and it's an experience just like Grow Home. It's not, you know, climbing or anything. It's not gameplay or concept wise the same, but it has that same feel, and games like that just make smart, pleasant little child-friendly games like that just amazing. So I definitely want to see more from Freshly Squeezed. I want to see more content to Defunct, even if it comes in the form of expansions. I would just love to see like 10 times the content. I want to just see more Defunct, because the only negative I have about this game is, you know, progression when it comes to jarring experience where you're stopping. That would just be completely alleviated if there was another 19 hours of gameplay, because you would get the skills you need to be able to play the game slightly more smoothly and slightly more skillfully, and so that would just be alleviated out the way, because the first hour and a half can be your learning experience and the stopping and starting, and then the rest of the time you can just be flying through. And you know, the length of the game is ultimately the thing that might decide it for some people. Only an hour and a half. If we had more content, it would just be fantastic. And you know, people might look at this game and go, oh, maybe that'll get boring after a couple of hours. But I found myself, when I was doing my benchmarks and I was recording some gameplay footage, I would replay the same like set of 3 levels about 6 or 7 times when it came to the benchmarks. And every time I did those levels outside of benchmarks, thankfully, I would always do something slightly different, or something would surprise me, or I'd suddenly see something that I didn't see before for some unknown reason. And it just felt good all the way through. So yeah, I definitely recommend this game. I would recommend it a lot more if there was a lot more to it, if there was more content, and I really, really, really hope that Freshly Squeezed put out a lot more content for Defunct. So yeah, absolutely fantastic game. And like I said in the last Next Week in Gaming article, it's definitely a good game for a Steam machine for a quick blast. So yeah, I hope we see more of Defunct, and I hope we see a lot more than we have currently. An hour and a half is just not enough, and I like it so much that I definitely want to play a little bit more of that. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. You can see the full written review and the performance analysis in the link below, and we'll probably see you guys on Saturday for our Next Week in Gaming. So we'll see you guys then.